So we're examining the evidence. Key in evolution is this fossil record. You call that the geologic table. Sometimes they call it that. It's a presupposed thing, though, because it varies all over the world. So they presuppose what it should be like and make excuses for when they are different, which is almost all the time. You go to another location, you find the fossil record, the order and appearance, and the rock strata that these fossils appear in varies somewhat, if not a lot. So they have to make explanations why, and it's just all guesswork. So these quotations that explain this guesswork stuff from outstanding evolutionary authorities, the ones that consider themselves outstanding, both in geology and biology, demonstrate the great importance of the paleontological record to the theory of evolution. And it really should be not theory. It's not a theory. Why isn't it a theory? People use that all the time. A theory is scientific. You've observed it repeatedly, falsified it, and repeated it. So it's falsifiable, repeatable, and observable. So if you can't observe it, which we cannot, we can observe some evidence that might have come from one thing or the other, but it's sitting there, and we don't know what age it might have come from, or what circumstances brought this fossil here or this rock there. I remember one time they found a rock that had uranium U-235 and lead in it. And so one edge of the rock showed, according to the radiation rate of U-235, to be about, I don't know, 20 million years old. The other side was 18 or said 20 or less. So they decided to add the two together and divide it by 2. And the problem with that is, number one, if it's sitting there on that beach by a body of water that was nearby, uranium is soluble. So after a while, if that rock was sitting in the water, it would dissolve the uranium, but the lead would remain. So how do we know how old that thing is? Because the age of the rock depends upon the amount of lead as opposed to the amount of uranium. And then we figure out the half-life and figure out how old one end of the rock was several million years older than the other. It's the same rock. It wasn't all that big. See, so there's all kinds of things going on that just to fulfill the presupposed idea of what these ages are, then you look at the reality of something out in the field, archaeologically speaking, and you have to then make up a story when it's not consistent, which it hardly ever is totally consistent. So, these quotations from outstanding evolutionary authorities, both in geology and biology, demonstrate the great importance of the paleontological record to the theory model of evolution. So it's a model. It's not a theory because we don't have observability, falsifiability, and repeatability. And so it's just a model. In turn, the principles of evolution and uniformity are seen to be of paramount importance in the correlation of the geologic strata. These principles are absolutely basic, both from the point of view of the history of the development of modern geology and from that of present interpretation of geologic field data. The circular reasoning here should be evident. How old is the fossil? As old as the rocks. How old is the rocks? As old as the fossil. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? The circular reasoning here should be evident, and indeed is evident, even to many historical geologists. For example, R.H. Rastall. It cannot be denied that, from a strictly philosophical standpoint, geologists are here arguing in a circle. The succession of organisms has been determined ahead of time. That's why I said presupposed. By a study of their remains embedded in the rocks, and the relative ages of the rocks are determined by the remains of organisms that they contain. He goes on to say, it is maintained by many stratigraphers, in other words, archaeologists, rock people, individuals studying the origin, composition, succession, and distribution of rock strata, that other factors, especially that of superposition, layered positions of the strata, are also important in geologic correlation, and that, in general, these factors justify the usual assignment of ages to strata, assignment of those ages to the rock strata on the basis of their fossil contents. How old are the rocks? Well, the fossils are in those rocks are this old. But what happens if they find fossils in other rocks that are supposed to be younger or even older? How do you explain that? The usual situation, however, is that only a few formations are ever superposed in any one locality, and that it is very difficult or impossible to correlate strata in different localities by this principle of superposition, because it's always different. Variations. The fossils must be resorted to, and the fossil sequence is falsely assumed to accord with the principle of evolution. Furthermore, even where superposed strata are exposed, it rather often happens that the fossils appear to be in reverse order from that demanded by the evolutionary history, which paradox is commonly explained by the assumption without proof that the strata have been folded or faulted out of their original sequence. Something happened. Sometimes superlifting. So you have a huge slab of rock. It's lifted up by some force, I don't know, earthquake or something, and then some other rock comes down on top of it, and then it allows it to fall down. That's pretty neat, and it's usually very, very violent, especially when you have a huge rock. Sometimes one of the things in Pennsylvania was like 100 miles long. How did that all get to be such a thin line all the way down with no rubble back and forth? You know, you pick up a big, huge rock like this, and something else comes in force and in place, and everything slams down on it. Stuff is going to break, even rocks. See? So, furthermore, even when superposed strata are exposed, it rather often happens that the fossils appear to be in reverse order from that demanded by the evolutionary history, from which paradox is commonly explained by the assumption without proof that the strata have been folded or faulted out of their original sequence. No uplifting, really, no rubble. So we have Schubert and Dunbar in their writing. In any particular region, the sequence of geologic events is clearly shown by the order of superposition and undeformed sedimentary formations. Evolutionists, by the use of the word undeformed in the context above, indicate that they only consider formations as normal, which do not contradict the order indicated in their falsified geological timescale, presupposed, established, and upheld by themselves. They don't have any real evidence to that. They just draw conclusions. And then, when there's something contradictory, they say, well, this is what we say. So if it differs, it's not properly done. Something happened. And let's explain it by uplifting or something unusual. The other formations, which are innumerable, they classify arbitrarily and falsely as deformed. In other words, it should have been the way this was, but it wasn't the way we think it should be, so it's deformed. Actually, they're not deformed at all, but are an expected sedimentary deposit of a flooded condition on the earth. What does that mean? We have a lot of water coming down into an area, even a local flood, and it carries with it all kinds of stuff. Different fossils, the same fossils in different order. It just depends upon where the water goes, right? And what the water picks up. Now, maybe some fossils or animals were drowned in one area that didn't exist in another area. So those fossils, and then they come from another area, they were there. So those fossils are out of order from one another. No, the flood water carries with it what it takes. Maybe there weren't any reindeer over here, but there were reindeer over there. If the reindeer don't appear in a particular fossil record, it doesn't mean that you have to change the date. You have to realize, how did that word get there? Most of the time, water got it there. See, it just wasn't the fossil just died, and then other things formed over it and over and over it. The one big whole flood came, and you know what? You see floods. You got flood waters going this way, flood waters going that way, and they slam into each other, deposit what they're doing there, and others go right on through. So it's totally haphazard. What happens, I think, mainly, is whatever in that flood water, the most dense and spherical in that particular group of water where they slam together and drop everything because they slow down, then all that stuff that's brought along gets deposited in the ground right there. The most spherical and the most dense fall down first. They go down faster. And the less spherical, the more deformed, tends to sink less rapidly. See, so this is just a matter, and we do this, we can put all this kind of stuff in a big old glass jar and watch it and swirl it around, and it deposits itself the same way every time. But if you have different items in the deposit, then you have different things in different order. It's obvious. So, the other formations, which are innumerable, they classify arbitrarily and falsely as deformed. Actually, they are not deformed at all, but are an expected sedimentary deposit of a flooded condition on the Earth. Spherical and density being the rule of thumb. Just try that. Just get a bunch of pebbles and put them in a glass jar, drop them all in there, swirl it all around, see how they settle. Then grab a bunch of different pebbles. We do this with different colors too, so you can see exactly how they form. Every single time they form the same way, the same pebbles. But then you change the pebbles around, and it's a different one. See? So of course there are many places where the succession has been locally inverted by folding or interrupted by faulting, but such exceptions will betray themselves in the evidence of disturbance and in the unnatural succession of the fossils. That's what he says, unnatural succession. No, it's not unnatural. You know, water came around and drowned this bunch of group animals here, and a bunch of different animals there, and they slam together and they come out of order. Then later on, the fossils are different because the water, another wave of water comes and picks up different fossils. It's not that the order is different, it's that they picked up different fossils in the same wave. However, this is not the case. Evidence of disturbances are not found when fossils so frequently occur out of the expected order. Consider what Schindewolf says. The sedimentary rocks, by themselves, however, do not yield any specific time marks, setting aside the old law of superposition, which can provide relative age indicators only in a restricted manner, and which is unfit for age correlations. Moreover, it may be misleading in some cases. The beds in a section may be overturned, or, owing to a hidden thrust plane, older beds may overlie younger ones. This is what Schindewolf says. He's making this stuff up. The only chronometric scale applicable in geological history for the stratigraphic classification of rocks and for dating geological events exactly is furnished by the fossils. Owing to the irreversibility of evolution, they offer an unambiguous time scale for relative age determinations and for worldwide correlation of rocks. Wow. He's making this stuff up. This is unambiguous. It is ambiguous. It's not unambiguous. Just because fossils appear in the wrong place, and you explain it by all kinds of anomalies, which you never were there to observe in the first place. How do you know? Little evidence of that. Schindewolf, in comments on some stratigraphic terms. American Journal of Science says most of it's fiction. In other words, the geologic and fossiliferous formations in real life hardly ever conform to the falsely fabricated geologic timetable of the evolutionists that appears in so many textbooks. They try to corroborate with one another, so they resort instead to arbitrary and false assignments of specific ages to specific fossils without any proof, never considering the possibility that all life